Good evening to all and welcome to Byju's. Right. So this is Basavaraj. So we'll be continuing from where we have left yesterday. Hope I am audible as well as visible to you all. Just please confirm me that I am audible as well as visible to you all. Done. Done. Okay. Good evening. Good evening to all. Good evening. And warm welcome for the ecology and environment session. Right. So yesterday we made an effort in understanding the biodiversity. This biodiversity is millions of years of evolution or the work. And then we defined that the role of continental drift theory and plate tectonic theory for making the biodiversity to spread on the earth. And that created what we refer them as the physical barriers, mountains and the oceans, where the species get separated from each other and they evolved relatively in isolation with each other. And that geographical area where the particular type of plants and animal species survived, adapted to the particular environmental conditions, they are still surviving today. And we refer them as the biogeographical realms. And this is the work of continental drift theory and other process. Now, to analyze this, to understand this global distribution of the flora and fauna, we divided the entire earth into biomes. And biomes are the geographical areas, larger geographical areas with the distinct type of the plants and animal species which have adapted to particular environmental conditions. This is what the definition of biomes are. And in that we discussed major biomes. It can be desert biome. We made an effort in understanding the adaptation done by them. Then rainforests, coniferous forest, grasslands. So all these biomes and their characteristics, we made an effort in understanding. Now, keeping that in the mind, we will progress in understanding the further part of biodiversity. And here, the next term is ecotone. Now, the topics are very small. Focus on understanding and small discussions are there. Ecotone. So the moment when we say ecotone, you have to remember it is referred as zone of separation. It is referred as zone of separation. Separation or transition zone or transition zone. Right. So the moment when we say zone of separation, it means that it is separating the two entities. So hence ecotone separates two biomes or two diverse ecosystems. So it separates two different biomes or two diverse ecosystems. Diverse means different ecosystems. Is it clear? Now, example to this is, if you take the region, so one region is desert biome. So this is a desert biome. I'm giving an example. And on the other side, you are having a forest biome. So in between that, the transition area, this transition is referred as ecotone. This is called as ecotone. And here, the example of ecotone between desert and forest ecosystem is grasslands. Here it is grassland. So we say grassland is the ecotone between the desert ecosystem and forest ecosystem. And this transition area is very significant. Now, if we take the characteristics of this ecotone can be man-made or it can be natural. This ecotone, it can be man-made or it is natural. Or natural. It can be both way. This ecotone, it can be narrow or greater width. It can be narrow or sometimes it will have greater width. Remember, man-made or natural, narrow or greater width. Now, when we talk about the species which are there in the ecotone, so as it is a transition zone, we always find that in this species or in this area, the species of desert will also be there. The species of forests will also be there. So it means that overlapping of species will be seen in this area. So in the ecotone, overlapping of species will be there. Overlapping of species. So it means that this is rich in biodiversity. Rich in biodiversity. Because it will have the species of desert, it will have the species of forest and species of its own also. So it will have the species of both the biome plus its own species, and we refer that as ecotone. Now, the moment when we talk about the species which are there, as I told that the species will always compete with each other for their ecological niche. So there will never be coexistence. So hence, in the ecotone, the species will always compete. In the ecotone, the species will always compete. For ecological niche, for food, for their habitat, or for their survival. They always compete with each other. So hence, it is also referred as zone of tension, where always the animals will conflict. So hence, it is also referred as the zone of tension. Zone of tension. So this is referred as an ecotone. Now, apart from that, we also have to understand a term called as edge effect and edge species. So these two terms are there, edge effect and edge species. Edge species. What is edge effect and what is edge species? Now, if you take the species in the ecotone, we find as it is having overlapping. So it has the species of desert, it has the species of the forest also. But within them, there are certain species, or there is one species whose population and density is higher than other species. So in the ecotone, we find there is one species whose population or density is higher than other species. One species whose density is higher than other species. Now here you can take an example of the grassland. In the grassland, if you take in this example, in the grassland, you will have snakes, you will have rabbits, you will have deers, you will have many such. But within those, the population of the birds will be very high. The density of birds will be very high. So in the grassland ecosystem, the population of birds will be very high. Their density will be very high, is very high in the grassland. And this phenomenon, where the population of the species is more or density is more, we refer this as edge effect. This is called as edge effect. And the species whose population is more, the concerned species whose population is more, we refer that as edge species. And the species whose population is more, we refer that as edge species. Edge species. And here, in the context of grassland ecotone, the edge species is bird. Birds are edge species. So this is what we refer that as ecotone and edge effect. Ecotone and edge effect. Is that clear? Now the definitions of the same you will find here. So it can be narrow or wider. It is called as zone of tension because the species will always compete for their resources. Compete for resources, right? So it can be natural or man-made. It can be natural or man-made, or it is where we find the species are very rich in biodiversities. Now there are some species or communities where their population is more, their density is more, their population density is more. We refer that as edge effect. Edge effect. And most abundant species, most dense species which are found in that area, we refer them as edge species. We refer them as edge species. So please read these definitions. Read these definitions. So this is called as ecotone. Right. So this is a concept which you should remember. So ecotones are rich in biodiversity. So hence they are most productive. They are most productive because of richness of the species. Clear? Now next, we move on to understand something called as a wetland ecosystem. Now the moment when we say wetland ecosystem, you should remember wetland is an ecotone. Wetland is an ecotone. So it is an ecotone means it separates the two biomes. So hence it is an ecotone between the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem. So it is an ecotone between terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem. Aquatic ecosystem. So one side land, one side water. So in between that you will find this. So this is called as the ecotone. So hence, as it is ecotone, it is rich in biodiversity. It is rich in biodiversity. Rich in biodiversity. Mountains can be ecotone. See, mountains, when we say, it depends on which types of mountains are there. Mountains can be referred as barriers. Mountains can be referred as barriers. They can't be referred as ecotones, right? We refer them as physical barriers. We refer them as physical barriers. So in the mountains, if it is having grassland and one side the different, then we can refer that. Is it clear? Okay. So the ecosystem can be referred as ecotone, but not the landform. Not the landform. Right. Now here, remember, it is rich in biodiversity. Now, how to define a wetland? A very simple definition is any land area which is saturated with the water and which takes a unique type of characteristics. And this water which is saturated is either temporarily or permanent. Such unique ecosystems, we refer them as wetlands. So land area which is saturated with the water, either temporary or permanent, and takes a unique characteristics, then we refer that as wetland. And these wetlands, we always refer them as rich in biodiversities. So they have 40% of world's plant and animal species which breed in those areas. And these wetlands, they also store carbon dioxide in their trees or the flora. And this carbon dioxide which is stored in them, we refer that as blue carbon. Blue carbon. And hence ecosystems or the wetland ecosystems, they are referred as the carbon sink of the earth. Carbon sink of the earth. Apart from that, so these areas will also have undecomposed dead plants. And these undecomposed dead plants, we refer them as peatlands. Peatlands. Undecomposed. Undecomposed dead plants. We refer them as peatlands or peats. Right? Peatlands or peats. Now, these wetlands, they can be man-made or they can be natural. So these wetlands, they can be man-made, like a lake or a pond which is constructed, or any irrigation project where the water is stagnant. So we refer that as man-made, or it can be natural. Natural. This is one way of classifying the wetlands. Another way where we can classify the wetlands as two characteristics. They can be inland wetlands. Example of inland is lake, pond, etc. Or they can be coastal wetlands. They can be coastal wetlands. Example, you can give mangroves, coastal wetlands, mangroves, or estuary. So these are referred as the coastal wetlands. Coastal wetlands. So we can classify them in two ways. There are certain wetlands which are dominated by woody plants, Big trees are there. And we refer such wetlands as swamp. We refer them as swamp, which are dominated by woody wetlands. And there are certain wetlands which are dominated by small reeds or grasses, or small grasses. We refer them as marshy areas. Marshy. Apart from that, we also have the wetlands where they are dominated by peats. Wetlands which are dominated by peats. That is dead plants in the water bodies. And we refer them as bogs. The bogs. So they can be swamp, they can be marshy, or they can be bogs, where they are dominated by peatlands. So most of these peatlands, we find them in the Arctic areas or in some parts of Antarctica, and also in the areas where stagnant water is there. Is it clear? So please remember this. See, when we talk about lentic, you refer the definition. I told lentic is also a type of ecosystem. So in classifying the ecosystems, I told that all the ecosystems can be classified as lotic, lentic, and all. So lentic is a name given to the type of ecosystem. Don't get much confused. Is it clear? So this is about the wetland ecosystems. Now, if we take the wetland ecosystems in India, so in India, we have more than 7 lakh wetlands. In India, we have more than 7 lakh wetlands. More than 7 lakh wetlands. Right. So don't get confused with the, see, when we say the definition, lentic is a definition. Lentic means it is stagnant water. Lotic means flowing water. Focus on understanding rather than creating, rather than in between asking the questions, focus on understanding. So once you completely understand, then you can raise your questions. First, concentrate on the discussion. 100% you concentrate on the discussion, then only the things will become easy for you to understand. In between that, if you are unable to understand in the last stage, then you can ask in between. If you ask the questions, then you will be disturbed there. So please understand that. So more than 7 lakh wetlands are there in India, which can be coastal, which can be inland parts. So this is some rough idea about the wetlands. Now, apart from this, understand why wetlands and their significance. Now, these wetlands are very important because these wetlands are the part of water conservation. So wherever when we take the wetlands, so wetlands are very important. If you take their characteristics, if you take the characteristics of the wetlands, so wetlands, they play a very important role. So they are very important in water conservation, where they store the water. Second, these wetlands, they also make the area filled with the water, by which they help in growing of the flora, and by which they can increase the biodiversities. So they help in increasing biodiversity. Third, these wetlands, they perform ecological functions. Like they control soil erosion. And these ecosystems, they also perform environmental functions like absorbing of carbon dioxide. Environmental functions. By absorbing carbon dioxide, they absorb carbon dioxide, or we say they sequester the carbon dioxide, and by which we refer them as blue carbon. The vegetation which is in that region, right? And these wetlands, they also provide the water for drinking and irrigation. They provide the water for drinking and irrigation. And these wetlands, like lakes, ponds, etc., they are the areas where aquaculture is done. This is called as economic activity. That is rearing of the aquatic plants and animals for socio-economic benefit. Aquaculture is done. Is it clear? Then if you take these wetlands, so these wetlands, they provide space for many birds, migratory birds, which reaches to that area. So it protects and conserves migratory birds and animals. It provides breeding space for them. So hence these wetlands are very, very important. They are helpful in water conservation, biodiversity, ecological functions and all. So hence it is very important to identify the important wetlands and protect and conserve them. So that is the reason why it is very important to identify important wetlands. Plus protect and conserve them. Conserve them because of their immense role in biodiversity. And that is the reason why as they are having a tremendous influence on the biosphere or biodiversities, an effort was done for this. A global effort was done to protect, to identify and conserve that. And this global effort was done for the first time in the year 1971. in the country called as Iran. Iran. And in the Iran, the city called as Ramsar. In the city called as Ramsar, where they met to define the criteria to identify the important wetlands and methods of protecting and conservation of these wetlands. And that is where the next point is the Ramsar region. So Ramsar is a city in Iran. Ramsar is a city in Iran. So this area. Ramsar is the city in Iran. And in this Ramsar, for the first time in the year 1971, a global effort was done to identify the wetlands, to protect and conserve the wetlands. Global effort was done. And the outcome of this, when different countries of the world, they met for the first time to discuss the criteria and characteristics of the wetlands and their significance. And this outcome created something called as Ramsar Convention. This outcome is Ramsar Convention, International Convention. Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. And this Ramsar Convention on Wetland, it defined what is a wetland. So this Ramsar Convention gave the definition of wetland. Definition of wetland. And here the facts are, in the year 1971, February 2nd, it was adopted. It was adopted in the year 1971, and it came into force in 1975, which is called as Ramsar Convention on Wetland, International Convention, Ramsar Convention on Wetland. And this convention defined what is wetland. This convention defined what is wetland. What is the definition of the wetland according to Ramsar Convention? How Ramsar Convention defines the wetland? So definition of wetland according to Ramsar Convention. Right. It says that any water, focus on this, any water which can be stagnant or flowing water. Any water which is flowing or stagnant. Flowing means lotic and stagnant means lentic. So flowing means lotic and stagnant means lentic. Any water which is flowing or stagnant. Second, it says that this water can be fresh water or it can be saline water. So this water can be fresh water or saline water. Or saline water. Then it says that this water can be either temporarily or permanently saturated water. Temporary or permanently saturated water. Permanent saturated water. Saturated water. Or if you take the oceans, during the low tides in the oceans or sea, during low tide, in all these, whether it is flowing or stagnant, fresh water or saline, the depth of water not exceeding 6 meters. Depth of water not exceeding 6 meters. Not exceeding 6 meters. So such wetlands are referred as Ramsar wetland. So this is the definition of Ramsar wetland, which is accepted by the countries which signed the Ramsar Convention. The countries which signed the Ramsar Convention. So this is the moment that Ramsar wetland is there, then it is called as Ramsar wetland of international importance. So we say it is Ramsar wetland of international importance. Ramsar wetland of international importance. International importance. Right. Oceans, that is during the low tide. So whenever when the oceans or seas are there, the water is pushed towards the ocean and again it moves towards the coastal area. So we refer them as high tide and low tide. High tide means when it is reaching to the coastal. Low tide means when it is moving back to the ocean. Is it clear? So during that also, the depth should not be more than 6 meters. Now the definition is something like this. Any area, it can be permanent, temporary or anything, where the water is not exceeding 6 meters. So such water bodies, such wetlands are referred as Ramsar wetlands. Now, in India, I told that there are more than 7 lakh wetlands. More than 7 lakh wetlands are there in India. Out of these more than 7 lakh wetlands, in India, as per 2024, out of these 7 lakh, 84 are Ramsar wetlands. 84 are Ramsar wetlands in India. Right. So it means that these wetlands should gratify or should make certain criteria to meet. And here, according to the convention, it has made 9 criteria. It has given 9 criteria to be classified as Ramsar wetlands. And these criteria, you don't have to by heart them, but read them once rather than by hearting. And these criteria are, 9 criteria, they are rare or unique examples of natural or man-made. They support vulnerable, endangered or critically endangered species or the threatened communities. So they provide shelter to them, right? They support the population of the plants and animal species in the particular geographical regions, right? So they play a very important role in providing ecosystem services. They support more than 20,000 or more water birds. So it means they play an important role for the birds during their migratory routes. They play an important role for the birds during their migratory routes. Like Chilka Lake, right? Or any ponds, any lakes, Kyoldev, Loktak lakes. So all these are referred as wetlands, right? So they provide 1% of water species. So 9 criteria are there. Again, I am telling, don't by heart them, read them. So 9 criteria which classifies the wetlands as Ramsar wetlands. It supports significant proportion of indigenous species. So it means that these wetlands are very rich in biodiversities. They are very rich in biodiversity. And they play a very important role in supporting the threatened species, vulnerable species, critically endangered species. So if they satisfy these 9 criteria, then only we refer them as Ramsar wetlands. So again, I am telling you, in India, more than 7 lakh wetlands are there, out of which only 80 are referred as Ramsar wetlands. 80 are there which are referred as Ramsar wetlands. Is it clear? Now, what is importance of this Ramsar wetlands? Why this convention is important? Or what is the motive behind the Ramsar convention? Why it is significance? As the wetlands plays important role, I have explained what is their role. So UPSC always asks one question on that. Every year one question will be there on the role of wetlands or groundwater or something like that. One question will be there. Every time you will have the question on wetland, right? So as these wetlands are of immense importance because of their supporting characteristics and because of their rich properties which perform ecological functions, environmental functions, and also economic functions. I'm repeating. So these wetlands perform ecological functions, environmental functions, economic functions, and cultural functions like providing water for drinking, irrigation, etc. So they are of immense importance. Wetlands are of immense importance. They provide all type of sustainable development in that areas along with the protection and conservation, right? So hence in the Ramsar Convention, they always work towards the wise use of all the wetlands so that they perform their immense role. Wise use of all their wetlands so they perform their all roles, perform all roles, and provide services, provide services, right? Provide services, right? It is 80 wetlands, 76 plus 4, right? Then second, designate suitable wetlands for the list of international importance from your countries. So last year we proposed few wetlands, and this year we proposed 4 wetlands. So these 4 wetlands were accumulated in the existing list, and at present in the month of February, India has 80 Ramsar wetlands, so that they provide technical assistance, financial assistance, scientific assistance to protect these wetlands, so that Ramsar Convention provides them assistance to protect and conserve these wetlands. Conserve these wetlands. Is it clear? Then cooperate internationally. Cooperate internationally on the trans-border wetlands. Is it clear? So this is something which you should remember in the context of your preparation. 3 pillars of wetlands. And the day when it was adopted, February 2nd, is referred as the World Wetland Day. Every year, February 2nd. February 2nd is celebrated as the World Wetland Day. Every year we celebrate that. And the theme for this year, which creates awareness among the wetlands, the theme is to create awareness. To create awareness. So this year we celebrated wetlands as wetland and human well-being. Wetland and human well-being. So that is the theme of this year's wetland. Is it clear? So Ramsar Convention and missions of Ramsar Convention, and the 4 wetlands which were included, right? So the wetlands which were included, apologies, 5 wetlands which were included. 75 were there plus 5. 75 plus 5. So 80 Ramsar wetlands are there in India. 5 were included in this year. 3 from Karnataka and 2 from Tamil Nadu. 3 from Karnataka and 2 from Tamil Nadu. So totally 80 Ramsar wetlands are there. Is it clear? So please remember these data. So when I take the Indian part, so tomorrow we'll discuss the 5 we'll discuss the facts in tomorrow's class, right? Now, these wetlands, when they provide immense services and benefits. So do you think that these wetlands are free from the issues? If you take any pond, lake, or any water body near your habitation areas, where the industries are there, where the urban areas are there, where the agriculture activities are there, where the construction activities are there, where we don't have strong regulations to prevent them. So do you think that these wetlands are free from any type? See, I told that at present we are having 80 wetlands. So from where 84 numbers are there? I'm telling you continuously that in India we are having 80 wetlands. Is it clear? So here I told that there are certain wetlands. There are certain wetlands which are having a threat, maybe due to increasing population in that area, or maybe due to urbanization in that area, or maybe due to industrial effluents which are entering into that water bodies. So due to that pollution, due to increasing of the population, there is a threat to these wetlands. So there is a threat to these wetlands, threat to the Ramsar wetlands, to the Ramsar wetlands. And these threats can be due to pollution, or maybe due to agricultural impacts, or maybe due to debris which are thrown in that areas, where these wetlands, their ecological characteristics have changed, are changing, or maybe change. All the three perspectives already they are changed, they are changing, maybe changing, right? So characteristics have occurred, or likely to occur, or occurring. All the three cases: already occurred, occurring, or may occur in the future. So such wetlands, they always have a threat, and these wetlands need to be protected and conserved. And there we create a list of those wetlands. A list of those wetlands are created where they are having a threat of changing ecological characteristics, which poses the threat for the species which take shelter there. And that list is called as Montrac's record. And that list is called as Montrac's record. Right? Called as Montrac's record. Is it clear? Now, in the context of India, the first Ramsar wetland which was included in the Montrac's record was Chilka Lake. Chilka Lake. Now, because of systematic effort which is done by Ramsar Convention, technological assistance, technical assistance, scientific assistance, due to their efforts, this Chilka Lake is restored now. This Chilka Lake at present, it is restored. It is restored. And it is removed from the Ramsar list. It is removed from the list. But even today, if you take the present data in the year today, when we say 2024, there are two wetlands in India which are referred as the Montrac's records. Two wetlands in India which are in the Ramsar list, which are having a threat. We refer them as Montrac's record. And these two wetlands are, the first one is the Keoladeo National Park. Keoladeo National Park. So this is the first wetland which is having a threat. Due to change in the ecological characteristics. Apart from this Keoladeo National Park, one more wetland is there, which is also very immense important. We refer that as Loktak Lake. Now, Loktak Lake is in which state? It is in the northeastern part of India. Very important and immense lake. And this Loktak Lake is very famous for floating islands. It is very significant for floating islands. And these floating islands, we refer them as Fumdis. And this Loktak Lake is in Manipur. And this Loktak Lake is the largest freshwater lake in the northeastern part of India. And in this Loktak Lake, in these Fumdis, we have one national park which is referred as Kibble Limjau National Park. It has a national park which is referred as Kibble Limjau National Park. And the unique characteristics of this Kibble Limjau National Park, it is the only floating national park of the world. only floating national park of the world. And in the Skibble Limjaw National Park, it is having endemic species called as Sangai deer. It has Sangai deer or dancing deer. Dancing deer, which is endemic to that area. Endemic means native to that areas. So this is about Ramsar wetlands and Montrac's records. Now don't make in-depth analysis. These data and these definitions are more than sufficient. So at present, 80 Ramsar wetlands. Out of that, 2 are Montrac's records. So please keep this in the mind. 80 are Ramsar wetlands and 2 are in the Montrac's record. Simple facts. Right. Now, we moved on to understand a term which is told peatlands. So please read this carefully. Peatlands. So peatlands are dead plants. Dead, undecomposed plants. Right. So these dead plants, which are undecomposed, they have stored large amount of carbon dioxide when they were surviving. So they have stored large amount of carbon dioxide. And hence they are referred as carbon sink. Carbon sink. Now there may be question in the peatland this year and next year because due to melting of the glacier, these peatlands are exposed. Due to global warming and climate change, these peatlands, they are being exposed. And because of their exposition, there is possibility that whatever carbon dioxide which is stored in them, they will be released. Why? Because these dead plants, they become dry, and maybe due to forest fires they burn off, and when they burn, then they emit the carbon dioxide. So these peatlands, when they burn or when they decay, they release large amount of carbon dioxide, and then we refer them as carbon emitters. So due to exposure of the peatlands, they may start emitting large amount of carbon dioxide. Now, exposure of the peatland and global warming. I'm repeating, exposure of the peatland and global warming is referred as which type of feedback mechanism? Negative feedback mechanism or positive feedback mechanism? Exposure of the peatlands and global warming and climate change. Right. So it is referred as perfect positive feedback mechanism. So that is where they are always the cause of concern. So please remember, this year or next year, 100% you can expect a question on the peatlands. Perfect. It is creating a positive feedback mechanism, and hence it is a threat for global warming and climate change. Hence it is a threat for the global warming and climate change. This is how you have to conclude your points, right? So they are unique and rare ecosystems which provides immense services. They control the floods, they provide services and all. But due to droughts, due to forest fires, there may be possibility that they will emit back whatever amount of carbon dioxide which is absorbed with them, which is sequestered in them. Is it clear? So remember that peatlands are referred as terrestrial wetlands. Terrestrial wetland ecosystems where the waterlogging conditions prevent the plant material to decompose. So they will be in the same. If you visit any states, say Kerala or any water bodies, you will find the floating wooden dead branches will be there. And those are called as peats, undecomposed wood. A tree will be there, a dead tree in the water bodies, which is undecomposed, where the temperature is very less and the bacteria can't decompose them. And hence such undecomposed woods we refer them as peatlands. And if you see the global distribution of peatland, they are immensely found on the Earth's surfaces. And remember that the carbon dioxide which is stored in them, the carbon dioxide which is stored in them is technically very, very high than what it is seen in the forest areas. Is it clear? So they are very important. And globally, when we take their areas, so they cover 3 to 4% of the Earth. 3 to 4% of Earth. And this is the global distribution of the peatland. So we find them in the Arctic. So hence Arctic is referred as major carbon sink. I told that Arctic is referred as carbon sink. Right. So in the tropical areas, Indonesian forest, these areas. So there also we find the peatlands. So that's why the Indonesian forest fire exposes the peatland. Amazon forest fire exposes the peatlands. So here continuously the forest fires are there. They expose the peatlands. And these peatlands, when they burn, they will emit carbon dioxide. So that's why they are of major cause and concern. They are presently referred as major threat, because whatever carbon dioxide which is already stored will be released back to the earth. So stored carbon dioxide will be released back, will be emitted. So hence it is one of the major cause of concern in the present scenarios. So there may be question on peatlands, their significance. Is it clear? So all the important areas we can find them. We find them in the tropical areas, in the rainforests, and where the water bodies are more. And we also find them in the temperate regions or in the Arctic. Arctic tundra is referred as the major carbon sink. Is that clear now? Peatland and associated current affairs. This is the global distribution of peatland. So when they ask the question, so glance this slide, remember this, and put your points in the context of that. Is that clear? And remember, wetlands are biodiversity rich. Right. Now we move on to something called as mangroves. We don't on to mangroves. So mangroves is a wetland. You have to be very clear in defining that. Mangroves is a wetland. Plus, it is also an ecotone. So it is a wetland ecosystem. It is an ecotone. So it is rich in biodiversity. So you should create a data. Which can be very important to provide a proper introduction. Now, if you see the global distribution of mangroves, so these mangroves are found in the tropical areas. That is Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. And not only in the tropical areas, generally we refer them as in the intertidal areas. So what is intertidal area? So intertidal area means very simple. If this is an sea or ocean, we always find that ocean water, it moves towards the coastal area. We refer that as high tide. So this will create high tide when the water is pushed towards the coastal area. And again, the water moves back to the ocean. We refer that as it creates low tide. So high tide when the water is pushed to the maximum, low tide when the water again comes back. And this region between the high tide and low tide is referred as intertidal area. So here we find the mangroves. in between high tide and low tide. We refer that as intertidal area, between high tide and low tide. Is that clear? So hence mangroves are referred as tidal forests. Mangroves are referred as intertidal forest. Intertidal forest. Is that clear? And if you see the global distribution of mangroves, area-wise, global distribution of mangroves. So these mangroves covers 14.7 million hectares of the earth. They cover 14.7 million hectares. Of the earth. And if you take country-wise, the highest mangroves is found in Indonesia, the coastal area of Indonesia. And the mangroves of Indonesia, they make 40% of the global mangroves. 40% of the global mangroves. And then, sorry, not 40, 19%. Apologies for that. 19%. Indonesia, they make 19% of the global. 19% is made by Indonesia. And the second country where it is dominant is Brazil. And Brazil makes 9% of the mangroves. So globally, the maximum is in Indonesia. So this region we find in Indian part, in Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean also. So here we find a rich amount of the mangroves. Right. Now, what are the definition of mangroves and what are their characteristics? In a very simple definitions, the mangroves, when we say definition, they are different types of plant species. Different types of plant species. We refer that as heterogeneous. So they are heterogeneous plants. Heterogeneous plants. That is different types of plants. Heterogeneous plants which have adapted to particular type of environmental conditions. Particular environmental conditions. Right. So what particular type of environmental conditions are there? So they are adapted to two important conditions. That is salinity, salt tolerant, or salinity. And second adaptation is those areas, there will always be shortage of oxygen. Adapted to shortage of oxygen. And we refer that as hypoxia. Shortage of oxygen is referred as hypoxia. And such types of vegetation which have adapted to salinity and adapted to hypoxia, we refer them as halophytes. We refer them as halophytes. Right? So please remember the term halophytes. Is it clear? Now, how they make adaptation? So this is the data which you should remember. Intertidal region, and they are most productive because of the characteristics of ecotone and wetland. Right. Now their adaptability is done by making anatomical and physiological modification. So what type of modifications are there? The first one is they have the succulent leaves, that is fleshy leaves which can store fresh water. Right. And the sunken stomata is sunken, so that they will not lose the water through transpiration. So no or less transpiration. So that they will not lose the fresh water. Second, as that area is having shortage of oxygen, so they need the oxygen, and here the roots grow upward side, and these are referred as false roots. These are referred as false roots, which grows upside for oxygen, which grows upward for oxygen, and we refer them as negative geostrophic. Which grow upward, we refer them as negative geostrophic. Negative geostrophic. That is, they flow or they grow against the gravity. They grow against the gravity. So hence they are referred as false roots or nematophores. Hence they are referred as false roots or nematophores. They do not provide any type of physical support. They are used only for aeration. Only for aeration. So we refer them as pneumatophores. Then they have the characteristics called as VVP. The seed starts growing when they are attached to the tree. The seeds or the embryo. It starts growing. It starts growing when it is attached to the plant. Attached to the plant. And we refer that as vivipary characteristics. They start growing when they are still attached to the plants. Then they have the stilt roots, which provide them support. Which provide support. Stilt roots. So these are referred as anatomical and physiological modification, which help them to survive even in the saline condition and hypoxia. Saline means high salinity, and hypoxia means less oxygen content. Right. So please remember these. The terms are very important. Read them, write them. The technical terms are very, very important. Sometimes they may ask in the mains. Sometimes they may ask in the prelims. So please read them as much as possible. Write them, practice them. Then it becomes easy for you to remember. Right. Now, on the basis of their location, generally we can classify these mangroves into three types. I'm using the term generally. Generally, we classify them into three types of mangroves are there. Three types of mangroves are there. The first one is which is very near to the coastal areas. Near to the coastal areas. If you take this, as an coastal region in the ocean, now here we come across the mangroves. So the first one is here, which is referred as the tallest mangrove. We refer that as the black mangrove. So white mangrove here. White mangroves, tallest among all the mangroves in the shorelines. Right? In the shorelines. They generally have sort of color which is reddish in the color. Reddish in the color. Red mangroves. So we find them near the coastal areas. Red mangroves. Behind them, towards the land region, we have the second variety. We refer that as black mangrove. Here, black mangrove. And this black mangrove is, due to its color, dark brown or black brown, and this is comparatively less taller, around 65 feet in the height. So red mangrove, black mangrove, and then the last one is the white mangrove. White mangrove, right? And this white mangrove is around 50 feet. So 80 feet, 65 feet, and 50. 80, 65, 50 feet. And this is ocean. Right? 80 feet, 65 feet, 50 feet. Right? Red mangrove, then black mangrove, white mangrove. So they are very important. You have to understand. You have to understand. Sometimes in prelims they may ask. In prelims they may ask them. Right? So remember, white, black, red mangrove. So red mangrove is tallest among all. Tallest among all. So this region is called as intertidal area. Intertidal area. Right? Low tide and high tide. And this is the water which is pushed by the ocean. You have to remember. You have to remember. So that's why UPSC, when we say this ecology and environment, here it is more amount of facts are there. It's memory game. It's memory game. The syllabus is limited, but certain terms you have to memorize. Is that clear? So this is about the mangroves. Now, the next perspective is significance of mangroves. Significance means what are the benefits we get from the mangroves, or what services we get from the mangroves. The first one is it promotes sustainable fisheries. So whenever that areas where to and fro waters are there, it is rich in the nutrients, and as it is rich in the nutrients, marine species will get attracted to that. So it is for sustainable fisheries. It provides all the marine food resources in that areas. It provides timber and fodders when the water retreats there, when the vegetation becomes dry. So it provides timbers, and it also provides fodder for animals. Fodder for animals. Is that clear? Then it is a potential area for recreation and tourism. Take an example of Sundarban mangroves. Example, Sundarban mangroves. Or take the Pinchavaram mangroves of Tamil Nadu, where they visit every year. Right? So it is a recreational and tourism, which generates economic activities. They prevent the soil erosion. As the trees are there, when the river enters to the ocean, they reduce the velocity of that. So they do not allow the soil erosion. So they prevent the soil erosion because of the roots. And these roots hold more amount of the soil. They continuously hold more amount of soil. And as they hold more soil, then they will stabilize the shoreline, and they will create new land. In the roots, when large amount of soil accumulates continuously, millions of years, when the soil accumulates, so they will create a new land. So hence, wherever we find mangroves are there, the coastlines is stable, and where the mangroves have been destroyed, the coastal erosion is dominant. Please keep this in the mind. Please keep this in the mind. So wherever coastlines are there, if we take the example of Chennai, so in Chennai, where the Pichavaram mangroves have been destroyed, so erosion is maximum in Chennai region because of large amount of Pichavaram has been destroyed. So these mangroves, they are very important in preventing the soil erosion, and they create more land rather than erosion. So please keep this in the mind. Right? And they act as a bioshield. So what do you mean by bioshields? So when we talk about the tsunamis, in the episode of Chennai 2004, large amount of area was submerged because the first line of protection was not there. So they are referred as bioshield or first line of protection. First line of protection during tsunamis or cyclones, etc. Right? So they will act as a barrier. They will act as a barrier. So in the coastal areas, maybe 10 feet, 20 feet, 40 feet, big trees are there. So they will act as a barrier. So the waves will not reach to the coastal region, right? So they will not inundate. So they are referred as first line of protection. So wherever the mangroves have been destroyed, so large amount of cyclones make losses there. Large amount of tsunamis have made. And this we have already seen in the 2004 episode of tsunamis in Tamil Nadu, where large mangroves were destroyed. Up to 20 meters, 30 meters of the waves have been destroyed the cities in the Tamil Nadu region. Right. Then they purify the water by absorbing impurities and harmful heavy metals. This we will discuss. These are very important role called as bioremediation. Bioremediation. And when I take pollution, I'll explain that in detail. So they absorb the heavy metals and they keep them in their shoots or in the roots. So we'll discuss that in detail when I take pollution, right? And they are the main source of income to the coastal communities. And they provide nursery grounds for many species to take shelter there. And hence it is rich in biodiversity. It is rich in biodiversity. Is that clear? So these are referred as services or the benefits what we get from the wetlands, more specifically the mangroves, right? So please remember this. Every year a question will be asked either on wetlands or on the mangroves. Is it clear? Now, these mangroves, they also have the threat. Apart from providing the benefits, yes, they can be referred as carbon sequestration, means where they store the carbon. I missed this point. Carbon sequestration means they store the carbon dioxide in the form of photosynthesis, and this carbon dioxide which is sequestered, which is stored in them, is referred as blue carbon. Right. So sequestration means storing. And here it is the process of photosynthesis. And this is natural storing. Natural carbon sequestration. Is that clear? So these are referred as the significance of mangroves. Right. Now, as they are having services, benefits, so they are also having the threats. So what are the threats associated to the mangroves? The first one is pollution. So here we always find large amount of polluted water enters into that. Large amount of polluted waters enters here. Now this pollution may be because of oil pollution, due to accidents or leakages, or sometimes these pollutants may be from industries, industrial pollution, etc. Right. So these will always harm the mangroves. Industrial pollutant, oil pollutants, etc. So these mangroves are having a threat. Now, second aspect is global warming and climate change. Now, what is the impact of global warming and climate change? Now, here you should remember it is having two major threats with that. One is because of global warming and climate change, melting of ice is there. Melting of ice in the polar regions increase the sea level. And this increase in the sea level will have threat of their submergence. This is one. Second and very important is when the melting of the ice is done. So ice, when it melts, it adds more fresh water. So melting of ice adds fresh water. Right. Now, these mangroves, are they adapted to fresh water or saline water? First, these mangroves, are they adapted to fresh water or saline water? Right. So when we see their adaptation, So they are adapted to saline water. So instead of saline water, if you add fresh water, will they survive? Because they already made all the characteristics to adaptability to the salinity. So can they survive in the fresh water? No. So due to addition of the fresh water, their productivity decreases. Their productivity decreases. They add fresh water, their productivity decreases. Because they have adapted to the saline conditions. They have made their adaptation to the salinity. Adapted to the salinity. So hence, this global warming and climate change is major threat to the mangroves due to change in the characteristic of water and submergence. Is it clear? Then logging. Logging means cutting the forest for timbers. Illegal cutting for timbers. And this we have seen in many areas like Pinchavaram, where big trees are cut for economical part. And this is called as deforestation. Deforestation of mangroves. Mangroves. Then the coastal development. Coastal developments, where we find many areas are there, where we are constructing new ports, where we are constructing infrastructures. So by that, felling up of trees will be there. Felling up of trees will be there. And the classical example of this is when we take the look of the Niti Ayog, where it has given an approval for the Great Nicobar Development Project. Great Nicobar Development Project. Right. Timber means big woods. Big woods. Right. Then agriculture and animal grazing. So generally in the context of agriculture, where we use large amount of fertilizers, plus as these areas are fertile, more amount of the coastal areas, we are converting them into agriculture. We are using fertilizer, that is one. Chemicals are added. Plus we are converting the mangroves to agriculture patches. Right. Apart from that, animal grazing, which is seen in that areas, when the water level is less, animal grazing like cattle, etc. So these cattle, they eat all the plants which are there. Like sometimes some medicinal plant may be there, sometimes some flowering plants are there. So they eat up all the plants. Example, medicinal plants or flowering plants, which are eaten by the cattle and cows. So hence these mangroves, in spite of providing many benefits, they are having major threats. Is it clear? So remember these two terms: benefits, threats. Now next, when you read about benefits, threats, now mangroves of India, facts which are very important. In the context of India, there is 3.3% of mangroves of world are found in India. 0.15 countries geographical area is having the mangroves, right? 0.15% of the geographical area of India is covered by mangroves. 20% of the population depends on it. That is, coastal populations depend on that. And it contributes to 1.07% of GDP. Very important in economic activities, where we find large amount of fish, prawns, products which are exported and imported. Right. So fish will be there, large catch of the fish, prawns, medicinal values, the plants, right? So they all are referred as important aspect of consumption and exports. Consumption and export. And exports, right? And if you take the total mangroves of India, total mangroves of India, it is 4,992 square kilometers of area. So this is the area of mangroves which is covered in India, as per the state of forest report. State of forest report. So when I take the Indian biodiversity, I'll explain what is the state of forest report. And the state of forest report releases report once in 2 years. It releases reports once in 2 years. Compared to 2019 data, there has been increase of 17 square kilometers. 17 square kilometers of mangroves have been increased in the context of India. And this increase has been seen in Odisha, which is 8 square kilometers, and Maharashtra, which is 4 square kilometers. This you should remember. These facts are very, very important. The Indian mangroves total area is 4,992 square kilometers, and the two states where the mangroves have increased in their area compared to last year is Odisha, which makes 8 square kilometers, and Maharashtra, which makes 4 square kilometers. Now, when we see the distribution of mangroves in India, if you take this as an India, out of that total mangroves which is seen in India, you have to show them we have to show them in the map perspectives. So 60% of mangroves are there in the eastern coast. 60% of mangroves are in the eastern coast, like Sundarban deltas. And the Sundarban mangrove is the largest continuous patch of mangroves in the world. Country-wise, it is Indonesia, which is spread. Sundarban is the largest forest in the world, continuous patch. So it is largest continuous mangrove forest in the world. Sundarban Delta. Please remember that. Largest in the world and also in India. Country-wise, Indonesia is dominant, which is spread in all the coastal areas. But a single patch, it is highest in India and also in the world, that is mangroves. And south of that, we are having a mangrove which is called as Bhitarkanika in Odisha. Bhitarkanika. You have to remember the names. Then we are having the mangroves in the Godavari. Godavari Delta. And then we are having the mangoes, second largest in Tamil Nadu, called as Pinchavaram. Pinchavaram in Tamil Nadu. And then we also have the mangroves in Andaman and Nicobar. So here you are having Andaman and Nicobar. So in the Andaman and Nicobar, we also have the mangroves, which makes 13% of mangroves. And that is in Baratang. 13% mangroves in Andaman and Nicobar at Bartang. And then remaining 27% is in the in the west coast. Remaining 27% is in the west coast. So this is the mangrove distribution of India. So if you are attempting any question on mangroves, please draw this. You have to draw this and keep this in the mind. So the distribution of mangroves in India, 60% in the west coast, and dominant patches are Sundarban, followed by Bhitarkanika, Godavari, then we are having Pinchavaram. At least remember 4 names. At least remember them. Baratang in the Andaman and Nicobar. And in the west coast along Maharashtra, Kerala. So you have many patches in the west coast, which makes 27% of the mangroves. Right. So this is something which you should remember. The mangroves in India. Is that clear? Right. Now, last perspective of mangroves is what are the modes in which the mangroves are protected? the modes in which mangroves are protected. Right. Now, the moment when we talk about the modes in which the protections are there, so remember the protective measures. In the context of India, Sundarban is the first mangroves. Sundarban is the first mangrove in the world which is considered under scientific management. You have to just write them. You don't have to elaborately explain them. Then Government of India set up National Mangrove Committee in the year 1976. And this committee advises the coastal states for conservation and development. And in the year 2007, Mangroves for Future, an initiation of IUCN and UNDP was there. IUCN means International Union for Conservation of Nature, International Union for Conservation of Nature, and UNDP, United Nations Development Program. United Nations Development Program. And India became a part of that in the year 2008. In the year 2008, which is about protection and conservation of mangroves. And this is international approach. Mangroves for Future. It is an international approach. International approach in protecting and conserving the mangroves. Is that clear? Then Mangroves Alliance for Climate, very important one. Mangroves Alliance for Climate. And this was initiated during COP27 in the year 2023. COP27 in the year 2023. So Conference of Parties of UNFCCC, of United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, UNFCCC. Now, where it was held? Mangroves Alliance for Climate. And this is an initiation. This is an initiation which is done by the host country plus Indonesia. It is initiation by UAE plus Indonesia. UAE and Indonesia, right? So remember, it is two countries which are involved there. COP27 was held in UAE. COP27 in 2023 was held in UAE along with Indonesia. This initiation was started. So the idea is protect the mangroves so that they play important role in climate change issues. Protect the mangroves so that they play important role in climate change issues. Why? Because mangroves are important carbon sinks. UNFCCC is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So when I take global warming and climate change, I'll explain that in detail. UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Every year they have a meeting, and we refer that as COP of UNFCCC. So when I take global warming and climate change, I'll explain that. So please remember this. And here, many countries joined to that. And the countries which are joined to that are India, Sri Lanka, right? Australia, Japan, and Spain. So sometimes they may ask in the prelims. India, Sri Lanka, Australia, Japan, and Spain are part of Mangroves Alliance for Climate, because these are the areas where they make their effort in controlling the climate change issues by emphasizing on mangroves. Then International Day for Conservation of Mangroves Ecosystem was started in the year 2015, and every year July 26 we celebrate that. And legal protection is done by Indian Forest Act of 1927, Wildlife Act of 1972. When we make abiding of them, or when the mangroves are destroyed beyond the legality, imposition of fine and strict action will be there. Then Biological Diversity Act of 2002 and Coastal Regulation Zone also protect. So I'll be discussing this in detail tomorrow when I take Indian biodiversity and coastal regulation zone. Next week I'll be discussing coastal regulation zone also. Right, right. So this you should keep in the mind. Coastal regulation zones. Is it clear? Then the government of India has initiated something called as MISTI. That is mangroves initiation for the shoreline habitat and tangible. That is protecting the mangroves with approach of central as well as state government, approaching both as center and the state level, so that they can be very significant in the context of restoring the mangroves. So whenever when you're writing any answer on the protective measures of the mangroves, please keep these things in the mind. Please keep these things in the mind. Is that clear? So please remember these perspectives about the mangroves protective measures, right? Now next we move on to something. Misty means, don't go with that. Misty is something which is, yes, in Bengal we refer them as uh, in Bengal we have that sweets which are referred as Misty, but Misty is an acronym. Misty means mangroves alliance for shoreline habitats and tangible incomes. So protecting and conserving the mangroves so that they can be beneficial to the economic activities to the coastal communities. Is that clear? Okay. Next, we move on to something called as corals. Corals, they are also referred as the rainforest of the sea. They are also referred as rainforest of the sea. Very important one. Now, generally, when we talk about the corals, we always have two types of corals. Two types of corals are there. Bioremediation means it is using of the plants and animals for controlling pollution. Bio, living things. Remediation means remedy to something. So it is using of plants and animals for controlling pollution. So when I take pollution, I'll explain that. When I take pollution, I'll explain in detail. So bioremediation is using of living plants and animals. Living plants and animals like bacteria and plants to control or reduce the pollution. We refer that as bioremediation for the pollution issues. Now, two types of corals are there. One is the hard coral and soft coral. Soft coral. Now, when we use the corals, generally most of the times we always say it is a hard coral, which has calcareous skeleton, which is made up of calcium carbonate, which is made up of calcium carbonate, CoCO3, CaCO3. We refer that as the calcareous skeleton. Calcareous skeleton. And these hard corals, they always stay in the tropical areas. So they are found in the tropical areas, tropical waters. That is in between Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, in the tropical areas, right? And these hard corals, they prefer to stay in a group. They prefer to stay in a group called as colony. They always stay in colony, group, right? Then these corals, they stay only in shallow waters where the water is not deep. So they stay in shallow waters, not deep water, shallow waters, right? And their finger-like projections, they are in the multiple of 6. Finger-like projections, they are in the multiple of 6. We refer them as hard corals. Now, in the same way, we are having soft corals as well. Now, what are these soft corals? Soft corals, they do not have hard skeleton. They do not have calcareous skeleton. They are very soft, no calcareous skeleton. And most of them, they prefer to stay singly, that is solitary. Most of them, they stay single or solitary. And these soft corals can be found in any place. They can be found in any place. that is beyond tropical areas, and also deep waters. And they can be found in the deep waters as well. Deep water also you can find them. But hard corals are found only in the shallow waters. These can be found in the deep waters. They prefer to stay singly, even though we find colony, but they prefer to stay singly, right? And their tentacles are multiple of 8. Their tentacles of multiple of 8. So this is the difference between hard coral and the soft corals. So two types of corals are there, hard as well as soft coral. And in this discussion, we'll be taking hard corals only, unless and until there is a note on soft corals. So we'll be discussing what is referred as the hard corals, right? Now, what is hard coral? In geography, you have studied. In geography, you have studied that. But still, I'll explain. Still, I'll explain that, right? So just another 5 minutes, then we can have a break. Because after this, you will be having a class up to 8:30. Up to 8:30, right? So concentrate on this point. At least 2 hours of stretch is important, right? Now, this is the last discussion, then you can have a break. Understand the terminologies. In the oceans, individual, small species, minute, small species, we refer them as polyps. Individual small species, we refer them as polyps, individually polyps. And these polyps, they absorb the salt from the rocks, calcium from the rocks. They absorb the calcium from the rocks and the water, and they create calcareous skeleton. Skeleton, which is made up of calcium carbonate, CaCO3, calcareous skeleton. Now, wherever ideal conditions are there, wherever they find ideal conditions like temperature of around 20 degrees to 25 degrees centigrade, shallow water, clean saline water, etc. Shallow water or clean saline water. So these polyps, they get attached to the island or coastal area. So if this is an island, or if this is a coastal area, if this is an island or the coastal areas, right? So these polyps, they get attached to that. Polyps get attached to that, or they get flocked to that. So continuously we find the corals will get attached to that. New polyps will get attached to that. So these polyps will get attached to that. And when they attach, they will create a colony. And the colony of polyps is referred as corals. The colony of polyps is referred as corals. Now they have created a colony. We refer them as the polyps. Now, polyps or corals are animals. They are small animals which are having hard skeleton. Now, these corals or animals, when they die, their hard skeleton will be there. And above the skeleton, the new corals will keep on depositing. So the skeleton of these dead corals, is referred as coral reef. Skeleton of dead coral is referred as coral reef. So hence we say the hard corals are reef builders. So hence the hard corals are reef builders. So this is the term polyp, corals and coral reef. Three terms you should remember. Polyp, colony of polyps is called as coral, and the skeleton of dead corals we refer them as coral reef. This is calcareous rock, which is made up of CaCO3. Calcareous rock, CaCO3. Now, these corals, as I told, they are animals. They are animals. Yes, the great barriers in the Australia, we have the dead corals are there. Above that, new corals accumulate. Above that, new corals will accumulate. So they create a skeleton, and above the skeleton, new corals keep on depositing them. Is it clear? Now, these corals, remember, these corals, they have a symbiotic relationship between a plant species. They have a symbiotic relationship with the plant species, that is algae. And this algae is referred as zooxanthellae. It is having the symbiotic relationship between that. Zooxanthellae is an algae and coral is an animal. So one is animal and one is symbiotic relation. One is plant. So algae is a plant and coral is an animal. And here you should remember, as it is symbiotic relation, both will survive in the presence of each other. I told you in the beginning when we talk about mutualism. Mutualism is a type of symbiotic relation where both will survive in the presence of each other. It means interchange is done. So what algae provides to the coral and what coral provides to the algae for this relation to maintain? Algae provides two things to the coral. The first one is algae provides food to the coral, and second one is it provides magnificent colors to the coral. It provides colors to the coral. So the maximum or the magnificent colors of the algae gives to the coral. So hence the corals will be having colorful aspect. So zooxanthellae provides two things, food and color. Now this food, it provides by a process called as photosynthesis. Now where do you find the photosynthesis is maximum, at deep water or shallow water? Where it requires sunlight, where the photosynthesis is maximum, in the deep water or shallow water, right? Shallow water. So it means that these algae will survive only in the shallow water. If the water is deep, they can't survive. So hence they are shallow waters. Is that clear? Because of the presence of the algae is important. So hence hard corals will be in the shallow waters. They can't survive in the deep waters. The moment when the water is deep, then the photosynthesis activity will be stopped. Perfect. Now, what is the thing which is supplied by the coral to the plants? Corals provides again two things to the zooxanthellae. It provides two things to that. The first one is it provides support, physical support, where the algae get attached to that. It provides physical support. And second thing is these corals provides raw material for photosynthesis. Raw material for photosynthesis, right? For photosynthesis. So hence it is referred as a symbiotic relationship between the corals and the algae. They perform only when the relationship is very friendly and close. Now when there is an environmental stress or pollution or something which takes place, corals leaves the algae. When there is a stress in the relation, the corals and algae separates from each other. When there is a stress, the corals and algae separate from each other. Now the moment when the algae separates from the coral, when the algae separates from the coral, do you think that it will leave the color to the coral? It will take back its color. It will take back its color. And this process of the color which is taken back by the coral, which will make the whitening of the coral. Right. So algae take back its color. When they get separate, algae take back its color, which makes the whitening of the coral. Whitening of coral. And this whitening of coral is referred as coral bleaching. Whitening of coral is referred as coral bleaching. Coral bleaching. Is it clear? So generally when we say coral bleaching, bleaching means whitening. So generally when we visit to the parlor, they say bleaching of the face. That means whitening of the face. Bleaching means whitening, right? So whenever the conditions are there, the algae get separated from that. They separate from that. They cannot tolerate the impact. So hence we refer that as coral bleaching. Now my question is, can we say coral bleaching is a death of a coral? Can we say coral bleaching is considered as a death of a coral? Right, perfect. It is no. Coral bleaching, like it is something like a person who is under hunger strike. A person who is under hunger strike. So if the coral bleaching persists, if the coral bleaching persists for a longer period of a time, then that coral bleaching can lead to death of coral. So please magnify the statement. Coral bleaching is not called as a death of a coral. If this coral bleaching continues, no, this coral bleaching can lead to death of coral. This coral bleaching, if it is continued, if it is continued, can lead to death of coral. Can lead to death of corals. Is that clear? So this is some rough idea about the coral, right? So this is what you should remember. The terms, the corals, their characteristics, and this. So it means that coral bleaching is indicating something. Coral bleaching is indicating something. It is indicating something. So what it indicates? It indicates the stress. It indicates the stress. Stress. So what type of stress which makes the corals to separate from the polyps? So this is some terms which we take in the context of understanding. Is it clear? So this is what we refer them as coral and their terminologies. And the global distribution of corals, when we say the global distribution of corals, largest corals we can find in this areas. 30% of the corals we find in this area. 30% we find in that areas, Philippines, etc. Right. Then Pacific Ocean has a 25%. Area, 25%. 25%. Indian Ocean and Red Sea. Indian Ocean and Red Sea, which makes 30%. 30%. Caribbean and North Atlantic. Caribbean and North Atlantic, which makes 14%. Right. So please remember these things. See, whether they are herbivore or carnivore, that is not important. Here, you should remember that they always have a symbiotic relationship with the algae for their food as well as for their color perspectives. So whatever may be their perspectives. So not all the corals behaves like that. So you should remember the terminologies. Is it clear? So don't confuse the Pacific Ring of Fire. Pacific Ring of Fire is this entire area surrounding the Pacific. So the eastern side of Pacific Ring, we say. So the corals are found in the tropical areas. So they are found in the tropical areas, right? And as I told that these corals, their skeletons which are there, the skeletons provide the area for species, and they are rich in biodiversities. Rich in biodiversity. These corals are rich in biodiversities, where their skeletons, the dead skeletons, they provide space for many insects, insects, small fish which take shelter in them, which take shelter in them. So hence these coral areas, they are very rich in biodiversities, and hence they are referred as, the term called as rainforests of the tropical sea, or we refer them as tropical rainforest of a sea. So we refer them as tropical rainforest of a sea. Rainforest of sea. Because of see, how does the coral will die? So coral will die because the coral is an animal. It is having certain life. It is having certain life. This bleaching can make it an accidental death, or it can die normally also. Every living organism has its life expectancy, so it can die naturally, or it can die because of coral bleaching. Two ways it can die: unnaturally because of coral bleaching, and naturally when its life expires. Is it clear? So that's how it dies. So pollution is also one aspect. So they are referred as the tropical rainforest of the seas. Now, last point, and here, when we talk about the tropical rainforest of the sea, now this tropical rainforest, the corals, they have majority of the flora or fauna here. So these corals are rich in animal species or plant species, or these corals, they are dominant in animal phyla or plant phyla. Here, when they provide the shelter, they are rich in animal species or rich in plant species. Anybody can explain this? Animal phyla. Perfect. So they are very rich in animal phyla rather than plant. Is that clear? So you can have a break. Then we can start the class at 7:05. We can start the class at 7:05. Is that clear? Yes, you can frame your question. You can frame your question. You can just frame your question, and after the break, I'll answer to that. Put your question here. Okay, welcome back. Right. So hope I'm audible as well as visible to you all. Right. Okay. Tropical rainforests are the areas within the tropical regions where the rainfall is very high, more than 200 centimeters of rainfall. And these are the areas where evergreen forests are there. The leaves will not shed. And these areas where we find the arborals, the plant dwelling animals are maximum. Right. I have given the entire characteristics. And these tropical rainforests you can find in Amazon forest, Indonesian forest, and in India we find them in the Western Ghats, western side, Tamil Nadu coast, and northeastern side. Right. So that is about the tropical rainforests. I have given you complete idea about rainforest. So please go through that slides. Now, the coral distribution in the world when we see. There are two areas where the global distribution is systematically seen. One is the coral triangle, and this coral triangle consists of 6 countries. It consists of 6 countries. Please remember them, and they are Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, and Solomon Islands. So coral islands consist of 6 countries, and they are rich in biodiversity. Rich in biodiversity. And in the southeast of that, in the southeast of that, we have Great Barrier Reef. Great Barrier Reef of Australia. And this Great Barrier Reef is also UNESCO's heritage site. UNESCO's heritage site. Heritage site. Now, both are rich in biodiversities. Both are rich in biodiversities. Many students make a confusion that putting coral triangle as a part of Great Barrier Reef, both are not the same. So we have coral triangle here and Great Barrier Reef somewhere here. They are two different parts, and both are very rich in biodiversity. Both are very rich in biodiversity. Is it clear? No. Here we come across the benefits what we get from the corals, the services or benefits. The first one is that as they are having large amount of the animal phyla, so they can be used as fisheries. Many fish or many marine organisms take shelter there. So they are important food resources. And these corals, they are used for medicinal values, more specifically the soft corals. More specifically, the soft corals, which are having many medicinal values, and they are used in cancer, arthritis, human bacterial, Alzheimer disease, etc. Only Great Barrier Reef is UNESCO's World Heritage Site. Only Great Barrier Reef. It is not the World Heritage Site. Only the Great Barrier Reef. Right. And they have calcareous skeleton, and this calcareous skeleton, that is CaCO3, and this calcium is very important for making cement. So hence this limestone and calcium is significant as a raw material for the industries. Raw material for the industries, right? Then these corals also provide coastal protections. May not be strong as the mangroves, but still, as they are having the structure, so these physical structures, they provide coastal protection. Physical structures which provides the coastal protection. It protects the coastal areas from erosion. It provides or it prevents erosion. Right, plays a very important role in that. So they stabilize the coastal areas. They act like a big structure where the soil erosion is reduced, the coastal erosion is reduced. And these sponges, they always provide filtration of the water. When the water enters into these corals, the sponges which are there, they always make the filtration of waters. And these are also the important areas where we find tourism and recreation. So generally in the coastal areas, when you have scuba divings, etc., so they create large amount of tourist activities, right? Recreational activities. So these are the benefits what we get from the corals. Benefits what we get from the corals. You have to remember at least four benefits, when you are writing your mains answers. So corals, their characteristics and their benefits. Now next is coral bleaching. So coral bleaching, in a very simple term, we refer that as whitening of the coral. Whitening of the coral. That's what I explained. Right. So it is a process. When the coral it gets separates from the algae, and algae is zooxanthellae. And here you can easily identify, this is colorful coral and this is bleached coral. The other side is bleached coral. This is bleached coral. So whitening of the coral. Now what are the reasons for coral bleaching? What are the reasons for coral bleaching? Right. Now here you should always remember, the relationship between the coral and algae is symbiotic relation. And when the stress is created, when there is a disturbances in the symbiotic relationship, the corals separate from the algae, and that's where the whitening takes place. Now what are the reasons for the stress? What are the reasons for the stress? The first one is periodic exposure. Periodic exposure may be because of cyclones, maybe because of tsunamis, or maybe because of the storms, etc. So when they are periodically exposed, they cannot survive in the conditions there. So by which the stress is created. Periodic exposure, maybe due to cyclones, tsunamis, storms, or sometimes maybe due to drought. Then bioinvasion, major threat, bioinvasion. And here in the context of corals, the prominent bioinvasion is of crown of thornfish. This crown of thornfish. So I'll discuss what is bioinvasion in the later stage. So bioinvasion means alien species. It is also called as alien species. And this alien species colonize the area. It colonizes the area. And it becomes the threat to the native species. Threat to native species. So I'll explain this, because at present we are having a major threat with bioinvasion. So I'll explain this in detail, maybe in the few more slides. Then there is something called as illegal activities or over mining activities. We refer that as coral mining for limestone and calcium. Coral mining, which is done for limestone and calcium, which disturbs their structure, which disturbs or destroys their structure. Right. So we refer that as bioerosion or man-made factor. Anthropogenic means man-made factor. And we refer that as coral mining. And that too, unscientific coral mining is a major threat. Unscientific. That is extracting more than what it can be built up, which can make a threat. It is just like collapsing their structure. Then unsustainable tourism. So unsustainable tourism, when it is done there, they can harm the corals, which can make physical harm there, like plastics which are thrown in that areas, or the pollution which is created by that, the pollution which is created by that, etc., which can destroy the relationship. Oil spills, oil spills, oil spills may be due to leakage, accidents, etc., etc. Right? Then global warming. So what is the impact of global warming on the corals? Now understand this. When there is a global warming, the aspect is that this global warming has two impacts. One is that melting of the glacier, and that will increase the sea level. Melting of the glacier, and this melting will increase the sea level. Sea level rise will be there, and the water will become deep. Water will become deep. Now, the moment when the water will become deep, they can't survive because corals prefer to stay in the saline water, in the shallow waters. So, this deep water will be a problem for them because they prefer to stay in the shallow water. Prefer to stay in the shallow water. So, that is one aspect. Then, second thing is, when we talk about the impact of global warming, so oceans are referred as carbon sink. We say oceans are referred as one of the major carbon sink. So it means large amount of carbon dioxide enters into the ocean. So this carbon dioxide which enters into the ocean, it reacts with the water. It reacts with the water there, that is H2O. And this carbon, when it reacts with the water, it converts itself into mild carbonic acid. And we refer that as acidification of ocean. Right? So here, the moment when we say acidification, it does not mean that the pH value of ocean water decreases. Average pH value of ocean water is 8.2. So when we say acidification does not mean that it is falling below 7. It shows decreasing tendency. That is 8.1, etc. But this acidification of ocean will harm the calcareous skeleton. And they harm the larvae. They make the skeleton soft. They will make the skeleton soft because one is acid and one is calcium carbonate. Is that clear? So these are the impact of global warming in the context of the climate change, right? In the context of coral bleaching. And in both the cases, the corals get separate from the algae. Right? Then we also have something called as El Nino and extreme cold temperature. El Nino means high temperature, and extreme cold temperature also, because when we talk about the corals, these corals can survive in the ideal temperature, somewhat around 20 to 25 degrees centigrade. They can survive. If the temperature increases because of El Nino, they can't survive. Or if the temperature decreases, like what it was done in the Florida in the year 2010, change in the temperature, they can't survive because their range is very less. Their survival range is very, very less. So their ecological amplitude of coral is very less. So they can survive within a very small range of temperature. They survive in a very small range of temperature. If the temperature varies more, then they can't survive. They can't survive. Is it clear? So we have an impact of El Nino, and we have an impact of the cold conditions, maybe sometimes due to extreme La Nina or extreme wind patterns. Is it clear? Presently we are facing El Nino effect, so yes, you will have that. And if you are reading your current affairs, already the Great Barrier Reef are undergoing mass bleaching at present. If you are reading your current affairs, if you are reading your current affairs, already in the current affairs we find that the Great Barrier Reefs of Australia are undergoing mass bleaching. This is your current affairs. Yes, they are. They are. So this is where the 2024 mass bleaching is seen in the context of the Great Barrier Reef. Now, here remember that coral bleaching is indicating two things. One is climate change, and second one is pollution. So this bleaching indicates something called as pollution, and it also indicates the climate change or global warming. Global warming. So any such species which show the indication, which shows the indication where it identifies the change in the environmental conditions, either the pollution or the changing in the environmental conditions, such type of species we refer them as indicator species. Such type of species we refer them as indicator species. So corals are indicator species. Indicator species, right? Indicator species. That means that coral bleaching, when the coral bleaching takes place, so it indicates either there is an increase in the temperature, or it will indicate the pollution which is entering in that areas. So such types of species we refer them as indicator species. So corals are referred as best indicators of global warming. Corals are referred as best indicators of climate change, where they indicate the increasing of the temperature in the ocean waters. So please remember these terminologies: coral bleaching, right? Now, in the context of mass bleaching, when large amount of corals, when they lose their corals due to the stress, we refer that as mass bleaching. Mass bleaching, right? When large volume of corals, when they lose the corals, we refer them as mass bleaching. And already the mass bleaching has started according to the report 2024. And before that, if you take the data of 2015 to 2022, so in this also we find there has been a bleaching from 2015 again up to 2018. Bleaching was there. So we find the frequencies of the bleaching has been increased. Frequency of the bleaching has been increased. That is, whitening of the coral has been increased. And one of the strong reason is the global warming. Global warming. More specifically, the El Nino factor. El Nino factor and increasing of the temperature of the ocean. We refer that as sea surface temperature, SST. SST, sea surface temperature, because the oceans are referred as major carbon sink. Oceans are referred as major carbon sink, CO2, which is absorbed by them. So due to that, sea surface temperature is increasing, and also because of El Nino, we find the temperatures are increasing in the coastal areas, which are affecting the corals. Now, a significant report was given by IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. IPCC. And regarding this, I'll discuss in the global warming. It has predicted that if the same type of global warming is there, the global reef will decline by 70 to 90%. If the global warming reaches to 1.5 degrees, and if it reaches to 2 degrees or higher, then entire coral will vanish out. Entire coral will vanish out, right? So it's a tremendous outcome which has given by IPCC report. It has highlighted that if the same present trend of global warming is there, if the same present trend of global warming is there, then we may lose entire corals by 2100 or end of the centuries if we are unable to maintain the 2-degree rise of temperature. So it is a major threat to the corals. Now, when we talk about the mass bleaching, initially some 30 years back or 40 years back, some 30 years back, you say 30 years back, or we say 20 years back, there was a time between the two mass bleaching. There was a gap between the two bleaching. There was a huge gap between two mass bleaching. Right. So one may be some 10 years back, one may be some 15 years back. So when there was a gap, corals could have recovered. So possibility of recovery was there. Recovery of coral was there when there was a gap between them. But if you take the present scenarios, or the recent scenarios, due to the impact of global warming and the climate change perspectives, we find that mass bleaching is showing two characteristics. It has increased in intensity, and it has also increased in its frequency. It means that the coral bleachings are occurring often and often. If you take the data, so 2 years back itself we had a coral bleaching. Now again we have entered into coral bleaching. And intensity means severity. They have become very severe. And because of that, as the frequency is increasing, as the intensity is increasing, so the recovery of coral is a major problem. So difficult in recovery. Difficult to recover. And hence, it can lead to death of corals. It is something like this. A person met with an accident, and the second accident is after 15 years, and the accidents are not severe. He will recover in that 10 years or 15 years. He will recover. As the accident is not severe, he will recover. That was some 20 years back. If we take present scenarios, last month he met with an accident, severe accident, and then again this month also he met with an accident, then again next month also he will be having an accident. Do you think that he will recover? Serious accidents, do you think he will recover? No, he can't recover. So this is what the present conditions of corals are there. They are making intense impact, and also the frequencies have been increased. So that's why the corals are under the threat, because of increasing in their frequencies and also their intensity. So that's why this mass bleaching is not a major problem, but its impact is major problem. The way in which it is there, the pattern of mass bleaching has become major problem now. The pattern of mass bleaching has become very, very problematic, because it has increased in the intensity and increased in the frequency, which has made the corals to recover. Is it clear now? Mass bleaching and the present mass bleaching. Now, mass bleaching always leads to death of a coral. Mass bleaching leads to death of a coral. Now, a person called as Wilkinson has established a relationship between the coral bleaching and death of the corals. A very significant one. This report can be asked in the examination. Wilkinson has classified the coral bleaching. He has established the relationship between coral bleaching and death. Coral bleaching and leading to the death. And based on that, he has classified all the types of coral bleaching into 4 categories. He has classified all the coral bleaching into 4 categories. Based on the bleaching leading to the death. Bleaching leading to the death. Right. Now, first one is it is referred as catastrophic if 75% of the corals die due to bleaching. That is, more than 75% of the corals die due to bleaching. We refer that as catastrophic type of coral bleaching. More than 75. Example is Pacific Ocean. Then second one is extremely affected one. If 50 to 75% of the corals die, 50 to 75% of the corals die due to bleaching, we refer that as the extremely affected. Example is Caribbean Sea and Red Sea. That is second category. Then third category, severely affected. If 25 to 50% of the corals die due to bleaching, if 20 to 50%, 25 to 50% die due to bleaching, we refer that as severely affected. It is corals of Indian coast. Then last one is moderately affected. If less than 25% corals die due to bleaching, we refer them as moderately. Example is Maldives. So please remember this. Please remember this. Even today, when we say severely affected, catastrophic, or extremely affected, it means that they use these datas. They use these data to explain. So if they say that the present mass bleaching is extremely affected, it means that we have lost 50 to 70% of the coral. Is it clear? So please read them, write them, practice them. The terminologies are very, very important. It's catastrophic, extremely, severely, and moderately affected. So relationship between coral bleaching and the deaths. Don't make elaboration. Read them, keep them in the finger points. Right. Now, the corals in India and some current affairs which are in the news. The distribution of corals in India are in the Gulf of Kutch, Malwan, Lakshadweep, Gulf of Mannar, Andaman Nicobar. And among these, the Gulf of Mannar is in the news. The corals of Gulf of Mannar in the news. Now, this Gulf of Mannar consists of a group of islands there. So it consists of 21 islands. 21 islands are there. And these 21 islands in the Gulf of Mannar, they are combined in the year 1986, and they are referred as the Gulf of Mannar National Park. Gulf of Mannar National Park. And this Gulf of Mannar National Park consists of 24 islands. Sorry, 21 islands. 21 islands, which are from Rameshwaram to Kanyakumari. Rameshwaram to Kanyakumari. Right. Then here we find among these the data, the facts which are important for the prelims. Among these, we have the islands, that is Vilangoshali and Puvar Sampati, have been submerged. Already they are submerged. Out of these, submerged due to illegal coral mining and direct attack of the waves. Because corals protect the areas. When the waves hit them, when there is an absence of corals, they will submerge them. Is it clear? Then the next aspect is the Gulf of Mannar's Van Island. Very important. Van Island, which is spread in 20 hectares. It split into two in the year 2013. It split into two in the year 2013 and eroded significantly because of unscientific coral mining in that area. And the government made a systematic approach to restore that. In the year 2015, the government made artificial reefs near that, so that to protect this one island. So this is the fact which was there. Now after that, when they made the all facilities in 2015, now the duty is to understand what it has been progressed. And this progress was given by the report last week. Last week, a report was given in the year 2024. That is in the month of March, last week itself. So here, the Tamil Nadu Climate Summit 2, which gave the report. And this report is referred as Gulf Reef of Coral Reefs of Gulf of Mannar. And this is done by an NGO which takes a dominant role in protecting and conserving. It has highlighted two things. The first thing is there is a systematically decrease in the corals there from 37% to 27%. So there is a decrease in the coral. Decrease in the total coral reef. It has decreased from 37% in the year 2005 to 27.3% in the year 2021. This is one. Now the second one, which is very important and which is providing some good hope, is because of the government efforts to restore the One Island, where they started the work in 2015, and due to that, it has improved. In the year 2005, the coral cover in the One Island, I'm using only for the One Island, it was 33%, and this has increased to 45.7% in the data which is given by 2024. See, coral mining within the limit is referred, but when it is done beyond that, we refer that as illegal mining. Yes, it is referred as illegal mining. It is referred when you take it naturally without destroying, we can allow that, but when it is done beyond that, we refer that as illegal mining of the corals, and that is where the threats are there. Now please remember this. So these are the facts which you can use in your current affairs. So this is about Gulf of Mannar Reef. So they may ask question on this areas. Now along with that, in the Gulf of Mannar also, we find that Tamil Nadu government has set up the first sanctuary to protect one particular animal there. Which is that sanctuary? Tamil Nadu government has also set up the first water sanctuary in India. First water sanctuary in India to protect and conserve that species. And that species is the state animal of Andaman and Nicobar. That is, the animal is sea cow, or we refer that as dugang. Or we refer that as sea cow. Now remember, sea cow means it is a herbivore. Is that clear? So sea cow is an alternate name. It is dugang. So please remember, dugang is a state animal of Andaman and Nicobar. Dugang is a state animal of Andaman and Nicobar, and to protect and conserve that, Tamil Nadu government has set up the first sanctuary in India in the Gulf of Mannar region. So such questions you can expect in your UPSC part. Is that clear? And this dugang is not only found in India, it is found in many parts. Right. Now next we move on to biodiversity hotspots. We moved on to understand biodiversity hotspots. We made an effort in understanding mega biodiverse countries that are different. Biodiversity hotspot is different. Country wise is different. So mega biodiversity hotspots means these are the areas within country. And these are rich in biodiversity. rich in biodiversity, and they have large amount of endemism. Endemism. Endemism means native species are there. Native species are there. Plus, they are the areas which have also lost their natural habitat. They have lost their natural habitat. It means they are under the threat. They are under the threat. So such areas which show both the combination, rich in diversity, rich in endemism, and they also have the threat, we refer them as a biodiversity hotspot. Now, how to define this biodiversity hotspot, or what are the criteria? Now, here Conservation International. Conservation International. It has set up two criteria. Two criteria to define any place as biodiversity hotspot. Two criteria to define biodiversity hotspot. Now, the first criteria, it says that. Right. So, first one is, it should have 1,500 plant species endemic to that. In the mega biodiverse countries, there should be 5,000 species. There should be 5,000. Here it is 1,500 species. It should have 1,500 plant species which are endemic to that area. Endemic to that region. And the second one is that they have already lost 70% of their natural habitat. They have lost 70% of natural habitat. They have already lost 70% of natural habitat. We refer them as the biodiversity hotspot. So please reframe your question. It's not the same. Dugong is sea cow. Dugong is sea cow. Right? Don't get confused. It's a herbivore. It's a herbivore. They're not the same. Now, what is the reason for loss? Reason for loss. Right. So the reason for loss is maybe due to hunting, and poaching, because of their skins, right? Because of their skins and tusks, etc. Right? So hunting and poaching will be there. Then because of deforestation and construction activities. Due to many factors like earthquake, volcanic activities, forest fires, etc. Or maybe due to events like cloud bursting, floods, right? Or glacial lake outburst floods, GLOFs in the Himalayas, etc. So hunting is there, deforestation, or sometimes when we convert that area into agriculture, conversion to agriculture, or maybe due to global warming and climate change, like droughts, which always affects that, maybe due to global warming and climate change, like droughts in that areas. Right. So because of all these activities, these possess always the threat. They always possess a threat. And that's why they have already lost 70% and more of their natural habitat. So these are the reason for loss. Reasons for the loss. Please remember, sometimes they may ask question, what are the major threats to the biodiversity's hotspots? So this is one thing, right? Now, if you take the global perspective, according to the present data, there are 36 biodiversity hotspots in the world. 36 biodiversity hotspots are there in the world, which are spread in different parts of the earth, And there is something called as CEPF. We refer that as Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. So please remember this fact for your current affairs, not for the mains. This is for prelims. So this Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, it is many institutions which are grouped there. Right? So they enable the financial assistance, technical assistance to protect the biodiversities. So it is NGOs, non-governmental, and the other sector organization, not the governmental, NGOs, non-governmental organization, and other sector. They collaborate to protect these world's biodiversity hotspots. So many areas are there which are covered by CEPF and which have been already covered by them. So here, just remember this name, Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund. Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, which is group of many institutions. More than 3-4 institutions are there, which provides the NGOs and the private sectors to pool up their resources to protect the biodiversity hotspot of the earth, to protect and conserve the biodiversity hotspots of the earth. Biodiversity hotspots of the earth. Right. So please go through this map carefully. Right. So there are certain areas which are already covered by them. Red color means where they are already invested. And this orange color, past investments are there. So past investments like Caucus and etc. Right. And if we take that, in India also we find them. Where they have made investments. Right. So they are marked as red because they are currently under CEPF. So please go with this. So the red color indicates that they are covered under CEPF, Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund, international fund, which talks about the protection and conservation of that. Right. CEPF investment in Polynesia. So when we talk about this CEPF investments in Polynesia, so already when we talk about Oceania, so generally when we talk about this country called as a group called as Oceania. So Oceania itself consists of 3 categories of islands: Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia. Right. So here among these, Polynesia was the one where they are already invested and they are working very well to restore them. Already they are invested in the 5 years back or 10 years back, Polynesia. So Indo-Oceania consists of 3 groups. Oceania group consists of 3 groups. Right. So please understand these things. I told that mega diverse countries, they cover 70% of the terrestrial biodiversity. Please read the statements carefully. Right. And these are the parts which are included in those countries. Is that clear? So remember, when we talk about Oceania consists of 3 subgroups: Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia. In this Polynesia, they have invested some 5 years back, 20 years back, to protect and conserve the biodiversities. Right. So read this map one time through time carefully. Now, in the context of India, we are having 4 biodiversity hotspots out of 36. There are 8 biodiversity hotspots which are very, very rich in endemism. And they also have major threat. very rich in endemism, very rich in endemism. And we refer them as the hottest hotspots. Hottest hotspots. And remember, out of 36, 8 are hottest hotspots. That is Madagascar, Philippines, Sundaland, Brazil's, Caribbean, Burma, Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, and Eastern Ghats. So out of 36, 8 are hottest hotspots, right? And with reference to India, out of 36, India has 4 biodiversity hotspots. India has 4 biodiversity hotspots. And out of these 4, 3 are referred as hottest hotspots. 3 are hottest hotspot. And they are the Sundaland, Indo-Burma, and Sri Lanka. Is that clear? So Indo-Burma, Sri Lanka. Facts which you should remember. Right. So at present, 36 biodiversity hotspots are there. Out of that, 8 are hottest hotspots. And out of 36, 4 are in India. And within that 4, 3 are referred as the hottest hotspots from India. Hottest hotspots from India. Very simple facts. Right. Now, these hotspots of India are Himalayas, Indo-Burma, except Assam. So Assam is not included in that. Assam is not included in that, right? Sundalands, they will never ask why the Assam is not included. They will never ask why the Assam is not included, because of its geographical location and because of its criterias. It has not lost much of that areas, right? Then Sundaland, which includes Nicobar group of islands, right? Sundalands, which includes the Nicobar group of islands. Then Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. Western Ghats and Sri Lanka. So these are referred as the 4 biodiversity hotspots of India. 4 biodiversity hotspots of India: Himalayas, Indo-Burma, Sundalands, Western Ghats, right? So out of that, Himalayas and Western Ghats are very prominently in the current affairs. Himalayas and Western Ghats are always seen into current affairs, right? Now, if you take a look of Himalayas, so Himalaya has a separate type of unique history. These Himalayas are referred as the youngest fold mountain. Now, they have been formed when the Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate. So it is due to plate tectonic theory, where we find Indian plate has subducted beneath the Eurasian plate. Right. So when the Indian plate subducted beneath the Eurasian plate, so we find the formation of Himalayas are there. Right. Youngest fold mountain. Right. Now here, when we talk about the Himalayas, so the major issues associated with the Himalayas. Sundaland is different, Sundarban is different. Right. Now, when we talk about the major issues in the Himalayas, because of its geological location, so it is always associated with earthquake due to the meeting of the boundary plates. It is associated with the earthquake. Second, as the Indian plate has subducted beneath the Eurasian plate, so more amount of landslides are there. It is associated with landslides, and not only landslides, land subduction, like Joshimath. In the Joshimath, we have seen that not the landslide, land has sink, landslide and land subsidence. Right. Third one is, here also we find large amount of hunting and poaching is there. Of animals for their skin, for their trade. Large amount of deforestation and overgrazing. Overgrazing. And here overgrazing is because of transhumans activities. Transhumans activities. Transhumans means seasonal movement of pastoral communities along with their cattle. Seasonal movement of pastoral communities along with their cattle. We refer that as transhumans activities. Fifth one is large amount of construction activities which are there. Construction activities in that areas. Hydroelectricity projects, roads, etc. Hydro projects, roads, etc. And this region is always has high altitude mountains which are always associated with cloud bursting, and the glacial lake outburst floods, GLOFs. So when you are having disaster management class, so there it will be discussed. Glacial lake outburst flood. Glacial lake outburst flood. So they are always associated with these. So these are the major issues where you find them. And recently we find that due to the impact of global warming and climate change, we find that they are experiencing drought, they are experiencing forest fires, and they are also experiencing high temperature. Right. So this is what the terms are. Yes, you can explain the same thing with the Ladakh. So Ladakh is a classical example where we find a person is under hunger strike, and the strike is for different part. He wants to have some other part, but yes, Ladakh is having the major issues, maybe for declaring that union territory, or maybe have some authorities. Hunger strike is there, but yes, Ladakh is undergoing environmental stress in that areas. Yes, it is undergoing environmental stress in that areas. Is it clear? So these are the major issues associated with the Himalayas: earthquakes, landslides, land subsidence, which are becoming threat to the Himalayas, threat to the Himalayan ecosystem. And that's why Himalayas are referred as fragile ecosystems. Himalayas are referred as fragile ecosystem. Fragile means sensitive ecosystems. Sensitive ecosystems, right? And these Himalayas are spread into how many states and union territories? These Himalayas, the mountains, Himalaya mountains are spread in how many states and union territories? Your geography question. Himalaya mountains are spread in how many states? Right. You don't have to Google that. You have to be very clear in your thoughts. Right. So here it consists of 11 states plus 2 union territories. 11 states, all the 7 northeastern states, right? 2 union territories, that is Ladakh and Kashmir, right? Then you have to take West Bengal, Sikkim, right? And then the 2 states. So 11 states and 2 union territories. So sometimes they may ask a question. Himalayas are spread in 11 states and 2 union territories. And part of that is very important, biodiversity hotspot, right? Now, next is Western Ghats. Next is about the Western Ghats. So now the moment when you talk about the Western Ghats are spread in how many states? They are spread in 6 states. 6 states. Now, in the same way, Eastern Ghats are spread in 5 states. You should have them all in your fingertips. Western Ghats are spread in 6 states. And these Western Ghats, they are biodiversity hotspots. It is also biodiversity hotspot, plus it is also UNESCO's World Heritage Site. It is also UNESCO's World Heritage Site. World Heritage Site. Heritage Site. Now, what is the significance of Western Ghats? Importance of Western Ghats. Importance of Western Ghats. So this Western Ghat is source of many rivers, east flowing rivers and west flowing rivers. Right. Western Ghats, they provide large amount of forest areas. It means that it is a carbon sink. Carbon sink. And these Western Ghats, they act as a barrier for southwest monsoons. They act as a barrier for southwest monsoon. And here we find it is rich with many biodiversities. So it provides immense services. It is rich with many plants and animals and protected areas like national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, etc. Right. So Western Ghats are immense important. Medicinal values are there. Carbon sinks are there. Southwest monsoons, which are there. So they are having immense importance. But at present, we find these Western Ghats are also having major issues. They also have major issues. Even though they were referred as stable, at present it is having major issues. So the major issues in the Western Ghats are due to deforestation, the stability has been reduced. So large amount of deforestation and construction activities. Construction activities. Construction means construction of hydroelectricity projects, roads, etc. Third, mining activities in that area. Mining activities in that area. Fourth, shifting cultivation in that areas. Shifting cultivation in that area. Fifth one is growing monocrops like rubber cultivation, coffee, etc. Or more areas which have been covered. So this is converting the area by conversion. By conversion. So deforestation is there, hydroelectricity projects, mining activities, shifting cultivation, etc. So all these activities have made the Western Ghats as unstable. So they have made the Western Ghats unstable. And hence, Western Ghat, which was referred as stable, now it is also showing the incidences of landslides. So it is also showing the incidence of landslides. And this we have already seen in the context of rainy season, where large amount of the issues are there, and all these have posed threat to biodiversity. All these have posed threat to biodiversity. Threat to biodiversity. And hence to protect this rich Western Ghats, the government came up with two committees. The first committee is referred as the Gadgil Committee. Conversion means converting the forest area into agriculture. Conversion means converting the forest area into agriculture areas. Illegally encroaching that. In the lowland areas, we convert that illegally without having any approvals. Right. Now, two committees are very important here in the context of Western Ghats. Two committees. Right. Now, the first committee is referred as the Gadgil Committee. Gadgil Committee, which was set by the government. And in this Gadgil Committee, this Gadgil Committee made a significant reports. It made a significant statements. It identified and studied the Western Ghats and made the points which are very important in the context of Western Ghats. So what it did is, it classified the entire Western Ghat. It classified the entire Western Ghat into ecological sensitive area. Into ecologically sensitive areas. ESA, ecologically sensitive area. And then classified the Western Ghats into 3 zones. Classified the Western Ghats into 3 zones. 3 zones. Zone 1, Zone 2, and Zone 3. 3 zones. It has classified the entire Western Ghats into 3 zones. We refer them as ecological sensitive Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3. Ecologically sensitive zone. Area is different, zone is different. So it has classified the entire Western Ghat into zones, ecological sensitive zones. So don't confuse area with the zones. So here it says that ecological sensitive zones are there. The zone 1 is completely protected area. Zone 1 is completely protected area. So no more types of hydroelectricity projects are allowed here. No more construction activities are allowed in this zone 1. And in zone 2, whatever existing projects are there, let them complete, and after that don't provide much land for projects. Zone 3 it says that if you want to set up any project, then you perform ecologically environment impact assessment. If you want to set up any project in the zone 3, you have to undergo environment impact assessment. So environment impact assessments itself is a very big topic, so we'll discuss that. Environment impact assessment is, in a very short, it is assess the impact of the proposed project on the environment. It is assessing the impact of the project, environmental impact of that project in that areas. We refer that as EI, environment impact assessment. And if you want to set up anything in zone 3, you have to undergo EI, environment impact assessment. So this is its recommendation. Then second recommendation here, it says that gram panchayats or the local authority should be given more. So decentralized and provide more power to the local authorities. So it says decentralize, more decentralization, and more power to the gram sabhas, local authorities. More power to local authorities, so that they can plan their areas. So these local people, they will be the decision makers to protect their regions. Third, ban on monocropping. Don't grow one crop. Ban on monocropping. Mono means single cropping. No single cropping, because when you are making single cropping, you are doing selective cultivation. So that exposes more areas which can become the area vulnerable for soil erosion and landslide. So it recommended that no monocropping, no single crop. If you are growing, don't destroy the forest areas. Along with the forest, you provide 2 or 3 crops in that area, so that the land is covered by vegetation. Right. So according to him, classifying the entire area into ecological sensitive zones, out of the Western Ghats, out of the total Western Ghats, he says that 64% of the Western Ghat, 64% of the area in the Western Ghat was referred as the protected area, So out of the Western Ghats, 64% was protected area, which falls under the coastal regulation zone 1. Green colors are zone 1. See this. Green colors are the zone 1. So 64% was protected area. And peoples opposed that. Peoples opposed this. They opposed this because they say that it will affect their economic activities. If it is protected area, people will not be allowed to enter there. So they opposed that it will affect their economic activity. Economic activity. It means their agricultural aspects will be destroyed. Employment issues will be there. They will not have any type of work or livelihood for their protection. So many states, that is almost all the states, opposed the Gadgil committee recommendation. So hence government set up one more committee. Government set up one more committee, and that committee which was set up is referred as the Kasturi Rangan committee. Kasturi Rangan committee, to study the entire Western Ghats. And under this Kasturi Rangan committee, it has classified the entire Western Ghats into two major categories of the lands. Two landscapes, that is cultural landscape, and natural landscape, where we find large amount of the vegetations are there. Natural landscape. And in this cultural landscape, it included the settlements. This cultural landscape, it included the settlement. Right, where the human settlements were there. So that areas he referred that as cultural settlements, where the human settlements are there. He says that natural landscape, they do not need any type of the recommendations, because they are naturally, and we don't interfere in that areas. But in the cultural landscape, where the human settlements are there, these people, they always depend on the forest resources for their livelihood, minor forest protects, etc. He says that in the cultural landscapes, it should have ecological sensitive areas. In the cultural landscape, it should have ecological sensitive area. Protected areas. Only in the cultural landscape, but not in the natural landscape. And if we take the area, the protected area in the Gadgil committee was 64%. But the protected area, according to Kasturi Rangan committee, which is only in the cultural landscape, which makes 37% of the area. 37% of Western Ghats. So there is a difference of the protected areas. In the Gadgil committee, it is 64%, and in the Kasturi Rangan committee, the protected areas is 37%. And here he says that in these ecological sensitive areas, mining should be banned, construction activity should be banned, hydroelectricity projects should be banned in that ecological sensitive areas. And even today, when we talk about Kasturi Rangan committee, many states are opposing that. They say that even this 37% is large area. So hence the states are opposing even this. They are opposing even the Kasturi Rangan committee. So remember, two committees, Gadgil committee and Kasturi Rangan committee. And the state governments are opposing both the committees. But in the year 2022, and 23, when there was large amount of the landslides which took place in Kerala and in the neighboring area, Supreme Court has ordered the states that they should implement the Gadgil committee. Supreme Court has ordered the center to coordinate with the states and implement the Gadgil committee report. Gadgil committee report. Is that clear? So please remember this Gadgil committee report. Is that clear? So Gadgil committee says it is a Western Ghats ecological expert, divided the region into 3 zones, complete ban on zone 1 and regulation in the zone 2. So hence his protected area is 64%. is the protected area, right? And ban on monocropping. More power should be given to the Gram Sabhas. More power should be given to the Gram Sabhas. Is that clear? So this is something which we refer them as the Western Ghats, 2 committees and their reports. Is that clear? Then this is called as Kasturi Rangan Committee report, high level working group. It has classified them into natural lands and cultural land. And in the cultural land, it says ecological sensitive areas, right? And ban on mining, quarrying should be done in the ecological sensitive areas, right? Building and construction of the projects to be banned in the ecological sensitive areas. So these are the important recommendations which were given by the Kasturi Rangan committee and the Gadgil committee. And the Supreme Court has said that you have to implement the Gadgil committee report. So maybe if the state governments implement, so you have to read the current affairs of 2024 now, which states will be opposing and which states will be implementing these 2 committees. Is that clear? So please remember this in your current affairs. Now here we come across something called as ecological sensitive area. Now what is this ecological sensitive area? Ecological sensitive area is if we are having this protected area. It is a protected area. Protected area means it can be a national park, it can be a wildlife sanctuary, etc. Any protected areas or wildlife sanctuaries. Right. So surrounding to that, up to 10 kilometers, up to 10 kilometers. This area, up to 10 kilometers, is a region which is referred as ecological sensitive area. So this 10-kilometer area is referred as ecological sensitive areas, ESA, right? And it is notified by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. MOFCC means Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, by Act of 1986, up to 10 kilometers in that area. So they act as a shock absorber to the protected areas. It means that if any human settlements are there, so they can't enter directly into protected. If any mining activities are there, they will not be disturbing the protected areas. So they will provide some security. They provide some safety to the regions which are in the protected areas, right? So they will always have less impact of the activities in that areas, right? And then criteria is based on the land, topography, climate and rainfall, land use pattern, and also all these are used by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change to classify environmental sensitive areas. Topography means nature of that land, whether it is having steep slopes or plain areas, rainfall in that areas, what are the widths of the roads, what are the settlements, what is the human population in that areas. So based on that ecological sensitive areas are declared. uh, Declared. Is it clear? ESA. Always keep this in the mind. Factual data is very important for your exams, right? Then hope spots. Hot spots are different, hope spots are different. Hope spots are different. Protected areas are also, see, protected areas are surrounded by ESAs. Don't get confused. So these protected areas are surrounded by ESAs. So this is ESA. This is not ESA. Protected areas are surrounded by ESA. Right. Now, hope spots. And it is an initiative of IUCN and Mission Blue. It is an initiation of International Union for Conservation of Nature. IUCN means International Union for Conservation of Nature. I'll be discussing that maybe tomorrow. IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature. And this IUCN is the same which gives the red list, IUCN red list, etc. So these are the 2 institutions, and these are the areas which are protected underwater or in the oceans. They are not the terrestrial, they are aquatic, underwater, aquatic. which are rich in biodiversities. Now remember, in India, we are having 4 biodiversity hotspots, but 2 hope spots are there. 2 hope spots are there. And they are the 2 islands, Andaman, Nicobar and Lakshadweep. So these are the 2 hope spots of India, Andaman and Nicobar Island, and second one is Lakshadweep. 2 hope spots of India. Is that clear? Okay. Factual, don't make elaboration. Factual. Now we move on to a concept called as bioinvasion. Now please understand this. Bioinvasion is considered as one of the major threat. One of the major threat. Now what is this bioinvasion? Now bioinvasion means it talks about a concept. Any pathogen means disease causing organism. Any pathogen, disease causing organism, or any plant or any animal. Any pathogen, plant or animal. If it is introduced out of its range, into some other areas, which is not its range, we refer that as bioinvasion. Out of its range. And this introduction can be accidental. Accidental means sometimes we are having this island and this is a country. Now they have reached to this island along with their ships for some trade activities, and these animals, they get attached to this, and then when they come back to the coastal areas, they are carried away accidentally. The species are carried away accidentally. So either it is accidental or it can be deliberate. Deliberate means with purpose. So such types of introduction of the pathogen, plant or animal, out of their range in some other areas is referred as bioinvasion or alien species. Right. Now what happens when it is introduced into some other areas? So it will have many impacts there. This alien species, when it is entered into some other areas, it will make ecological and economic harm to the areas where it is introduced. It will make ecological and economical harm to the area where it has entered. Second, this species which has entered there, that will harm the species or reduce the species. So it will harm the native species, harm or reduce the native species of the area. Or sometimes it can completely wipe out the native species. It can kill the native species. Kill or wipe out the native species. So hence, bioinvasion or alien species is a threat to biodiversity. Wherever where it has entered. Now, why it becomes threat? Why it performs these types of activities? Because of its characteristics. It is having strong rapid reproduction and growth. So it means it can disperse very fast. They reproduce very fast and grow also very fast. So it means they will disperse or spread very fast. They will disperse or spread very fast. spread very fast, right? So they disperse very fast because they don't have any natural enemy, no natural enemy, right? Then they have phenotypic plasticity. So it means that they adjust to the environment, any environment where they have entered. So they easily adjust to any type of environment. They easily adjust to any type of environment. Then they have the ability to survive on various types of food in various ranges. So they can survive in many type of foods. And because of that, they pose a threat to the native species. They pose a threat to native species. Which is one of the major reason for the loss of biodiversity in the world, which is one of the reason for loss of biodiversity. And the classical examples of this are, we talk about accidental as well as deliberate. Now, if you take this cane toad, this is cane toad, and this is the largest toad in the world. Largest toad in the world. And this cane toad, which is native of the North America or American place, it is native of America. Native of America. And from there it has been distributed or transferred or dispersed to many parts of the world. From there it has been reached to many parts of the world. Many part. Even in India also we find. And this is called as accidental. It is accidental, which has harmful impacts. Along with that, we also have water hyacinth, which also colonize that area, and it do not make the spread of another species, which can harm the aquatic animals. So these are referred as accidental one. Accidental one. Now, deliberate one. Deliberate means purposeful. Deliberate or purposeful. Now, this we have very classical example. In the context of India, we have the largest grassland. We refer them as bunny grassland. Bunny grassland in India. Bunny grassland in India, that is in Gujarat. Right. Now, to protect this bunny grassland from saline water, the marshy saline water from the Arabian Sea. So here we find that region. So marshy water can enter here. To protect the bunny grass from saline water. To protect it from saline water. Saline water. Government of India. Deliberately, with intention. Government of India, with intention. They planted a tree called as Prosopis juliflora. With intention, they planted a tree, bubble tree, or Prosopis juliflora. Bubble tree or Prosopis juliflora. Juliflora. Right. And this Prosopis juliflora in the bunny grassland has become a major threat. Now, this Prosopis juliflora, initially it was introduced for protecting that with the saline water, but now it has become a major threat. It has become a threat for the bunny grasslands. It has become a threat for bunny grasslands. Bunny grasslands, where the Maldhari communities depends on that. In this bunny grassland, we find Maldhari communities. Maldhari communities, they have their buffaloes. They have their buffaloes called as bunny buffalo. Bunny buffalo, which depends on these. So they are having the scarcity of the grasses because of large areas are covered by these types of Prosopis juliflora. So this is deliberate, deliberate. Now, apart from that, in the context of India, we also find large amount of the alien species are there. Alien species in India, more specifically in the Western Ghats and in the Himalayas. We find them like Spina spectralibis. So these have been introduced because of ornamentation, and this is also for ornamentation, lantern camera. So these are some of the important types of alien species which are spread across India, and these are the one which are having major threat to the biodiversities. So this is Prosopis juliflora, and these are the one. So sometimes if UPSC ask in the prelims, so remember these are the dominant alien species which are seen in India, more specifically in the Western Ghats and all. Now the major problem is when these alien species covers the areas, the native species will not grow, and the wild animals will not get their food also. Elephants and all, they can't eat them. So when they can't eat them, what they will do? They will leave the area and enter into the neighboring areas, which leads to man-animal conflict. This is what happening in a current affairs. Most of the Western Ghats, they are covered by these alien species. Most of the forests are covered by alien species. So hence, when they are covered by the alien species, the herbivore animals like elephants, deers, they can't eat other grasses. They can't cover also. They can't walk also. So what they will do? They leave the area and they enter into the human settlements. So when the deers and all, when they enter into the human settlements, then carnivores, how they can survive? So they will also enter along with them. And when elephants enters into the neighboring areas of agriculture patches, what will happen? Destruction of the crops and all those. We refer that as man-animal conflicts. So this completes the bio invasion or alien invasion, right? So we'll complete the class here. So tomorrow we'll take cause of biodiversities, right? So don't get much stress. Read them, and revise them and make the points and keep everything in your fingertips. So again, I'm telling you, go with the PPTs, and wherever the current affairs are there, I'm explaining them. And extra current affairs, when you get, you link that with your PPTs, and that is more than sufficient. So bioinvasion is always a hot topic, which is one of the major cause for loss of biodiversity. So tomorrow we will meet for the same, right, and we'll discuss the same thing. Thank you. Take care.